welcome to the Limitless Ladies in Leadership podcast. I am your host, Danielle, and I've created a space for the many powerful, creative, and limitless female leaders to share their stories. From female CEOs to professional athletes and doctors, every powerful woman has a story to tell. There's no guarantee where this podcast will take us, so welcome to the unfiltered, unedited, and badass space for all women to align. Let's get started. So after our recent podcast with Desiree of Not Me SD, I decided to dive a little deeper into the topic of firearms by inviting NRA Instructor, the Well-Armed Woman Instructor, Black Cat Firearms Instructor, and Chief Executive Officer of San Diego County Gun Owners Association, Wendy Hauffen. With a background in law, institutional research, and finance, as well as an MBA in business administration from the University of Southern California, Wendy has an array of personal skills that led her to where she's at now. Wendy, welcome. I can't wait to get started.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So before we dive into your beautiful, vast range of skills and professions on your resume, I want to know a little bit more about you. So where are you originally from?
So I grew up in Orange County. I moved down to San Diego about 15 years ago to attend UCSD, and I loved it here so much. It's so beautiful here in San Diego. I love the community here, the small town vibe. So I've been here ever since.
Awesome. So you seem to have started most of your career in the finance and law fields. What was your interest in those industries?
I think it was mostly me exploring, trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. Still haven't quite figured it out, but I think I'm almost there. I've always really liked law. I love law enforcement. I love areas that are structured. So I'm a very, my husband would call me very structured person. I like things that always stay the same. I like math. I like law. So those are kinds of things that appealed to me. So I started there, and it gave me a really good background in a lot of things that I do now, which is really cool. So I worked as a paralegal for 10 years, and then I did a little bit in finance here and there. I worked for a planning department for the university for a couple of years. So yeah, just a lot of different things, all very different, but kind of related. So it's been great though, because it's given me a lot of background for all the things that I do today.
Yeah. And I can totally relate to that. I was actually a math major in school, and I had a computer science minor. And, everybody always said, well, you're never going to do anything with math unless you're a teacher, because we have calculators these days, which is partially true, but I can say it does come in handy here and there.
Yeah, I'm glad to see a fellow nerd like me.
Yeah, STEM majors.
Yep.
Oh, so you received your MBA in business administration when you first attended USC. What were your goals in getting your master's? Like, what kind of business did you want to get into?
It's a very general degree. So we cover things like not just economics and accounting, but entrepreneurship and marketing and social media marketing, which are very different. Apparently, I didn't know this before I went into to get my MBA, and it's something that really helps my position now because basically I run the equivalent of a small business. It's a political advocacy organization, but we still have to address all the same things that small business owners address. And I think it gives me a lot of options in the future. So I didn't have a specific goal when I started my MBA, but it's already come in handy so many times during my time at San Diego County Gun Owners. So it's definitely going to help propel the organization even higher. And I have no plans to change positions anytime soon. Yeah.
And so I want to segue this. Congrats on your recent promotion, because you are now the CEO of San Diego County Gun Owners. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. It's a little uncomfortable. I'm not like an aggressive, like corporate ladder climber. So for me to say that I'm the CEO of anything is a little weird to me, but I'm growing into it. And, you know, I've been with the organization since the beginning, since we started in 2015. I was the COO for about a year, for the past year. You know, I mean, all of the major decisions are Michael and myself, who's our executive director. So the two of us work together on pretty much everything. So it's been really cool to take the lead and kind of, you know, take hold of the reins and push myself out of my comfort zone a little bit. But it's super exciting. I'm enjoying it so far.
Yeah, it's so awesome. And I have so many questions for you, because when I first heard about you and I was doing some research on you, I'm like, okay, so you're a Southern California girl, you're from Orange County, and then you're into guns. A lot of times those two don't really mix together. So I'd love to hear some background on you and how you first got started, or how you were first introduced into firearms.
Sure. So I was in a very psychologically abusive relationship for a long time. And when we broke up, I was feeling really uncomfortable. So I don't like to share a lot of details, but I'll share some of them. You know, I mean, I would get text messages about where my car was parked that night. You know, if I parked in a different spot, he would send me threatening messages like, oh, were you out partying all night? You know, hitting up all the guys, you know, calling me all sorts of names. I would go into a meeting and come back to 50 text messages and, you know, 30 missed calls, just stuff like that. He knew where I lived. Obviously, he even left, you know, I can't prove it, but there were like his cologne scent would like be in my car. It was just really, really uncomfortable for me. And at the same time, I had started dating somebody else. He was very, very into guns. And he was like, you got to learn how to shoot. Like, this is so important, you know? And so he helped me buy my first gun. We went shooting on a regular basis. And that relationship didn't end up working out. But after he left, I realized that I really, really enjoyed shooting. I was going by myself to the range, you know, at least once a week, all the time. And what started happening was, as soon as I really started talking about being into guns on like social media and stuff like that, or to my friends, I started hearing a lot of the same things from a lot of people, especially women. So they would say things like, oh, I always wanted to try that, but I don't know where to start, or it's just so intimidating, or I don't want to go by myself. I don't want to be the only girl in the room and all the guys are going to stare at me. So I heard this over and over and over again. And I started getting involved in a couple of organizations, started volunteering. And one of them convinced me to get my instructor certification. And as soon as I did that, I realized I really, really enjoyed teaching. And there's such a need. There's this big gap in resources available for women to become gun owners and to become proficient and to go practice. So not just getting their CCW or like succeeding and becoming some like super badass shooter. It's not even just that. It's like even stepping foot into a gun shop is really intimidating for most women. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I got started. And then right after that, I found San Diego County Gun Owners. I got really involved there. And so the funny thing is, I say this all the time. I never, ever thought I would ever be involved in politics because I am not actually a fan of politics.
Yeah.
So it's kind of ironic. And, you know, I think it's a cosmic joke that I ended up becoming really involved in politics, but just about this one area that I'm super passionate about.
Yeah, and I can't wait to dive into that. Now, I want to go backwards a little when you were talking about first purchasing a firearm, first learning, and just the idea of women having this fear. Because I can say that even for me, I grew up in the desert. I was around guns when I was a kid. My dad had a shotgun. Like, it wasn't completely foreign to me. But my first like real boyfriend when I was like right before I was 20 was a cop. He was a sheriff's deputy. And so I got a little bit more introduced to it there, and we would go to the range together. And I remember thinking at one point, like, gosh, I could never do this like without him or going into a gun store. It's like, I don't want to look like an idiot. Or it might be like, I think it's the same way sometimes when people have never been into a weed store, they're like brand new and people are like, wait a minute, like, what am I supposed to do?
Like they
here?
can tell you're a tourist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that fear of what you said, like, I don't want to look like an idiot. That is something that is so pervasive for every woman I've ever met, you know? And so when it's something so confusing, there's so many laws, there's so many guns, there's so many things that you feel like you have to learn to become a gun owner. That is I feel like that's the biggest hurdle for women to get over. Like that's the biggest deterrent for them to even start trying.
Absolutely. And then on top of that, a lot of gun stores are, mostly men working there and mostly men clients. And there's kind of this like, well, depending on what area you're in, but especially in San Diego, there's a big like Marine and cop, presence that's kind of like intimidating to some people in their first walking in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So were you afraid of shooting before you picked one up? Did you have a fear of it?
I wouldn't say it was a fear, but it was a definite uncomfortable because I didn't touch my first gun until I think I was 20. And then, I went shooting with a friend. It was just this like cool thing I had done once. And then I didn't touch another gun for like another 5 years and maybe 4 years. I think it was 4 years, but it was definitely not something that I was like, oh yeah, I'll just learn how to do it and I'll be great at it. It was like, oh my gosh, there's so much stuff to learn. And there's like, it's really confusing. And like, am I doing it right? And again, it's that thing about like, I don't know if I could do this without him because I'm not totally sure I'm doing it correctly. And with firearms, because it is inherently dangerous, that I didn't want to mess something up and potentially injure somebody or myself.
Yeah.
So it took a while to get comfortable and realize that, hey, like I kind of do know what I'm doing. So that's a good question though.
Yeah. And another topic we had kind of discussed with Desiree's episode, but I'd love to hear your input as well. This, especially in this climate that we're in right now in 2021, the topic of gun ownership can be extremely sensitive. And I get it. The media is projecting a lot of association between guns and violence. And there's not really a whole lot of promotion of using guns as a self-defense, which is the only reason other than target practice that I feel you should be firing a gun. But I guess why do you feel that every woman should know how to properly use and even own a firearm?
Well, I think a firearm is the most effective tool that has ever been created for self-defense. There are a lot of other options for self-defense, and I think that women should learn as many of them as they can. I know you do some martial arts, I think, right?
Yeah.
Am I quoting you wrong?
No, you're right.
Yeah. So, I mean, martial arts, pepper spray, whatever other techniques that you can add to your tool belt, those are all fantastic. But the reality is, if I'm confronted by my 6 foot tall, 250 pound ex-boyfriend, I'm going to need that firearm to be able to protect myself effectively and quickly without having to get really close to him, or without having to use a lot of force. I'm not the strongest or most fit person ever. So I think it's really easy to learn how to use a firearm. It's really easy. It's very versatile. and it's so effective. So, maybe it's not for everybody. I totally get that. Not everybody wants to own a firearm. Not everybody wants to carry one, but the ability to have that option is so important. And having fear be the reason that you don't want to have one or carry one, I just want to make sure that those people realize that you can get over that fear. You can learn how to use it. You don't have to be the only woman in the room. There are resources for women out there who want to learn and want to become a gun owner and feel comfortable about it.
Yeah. And what comes up for me when you talk about this is if we go back and you think about your personal story and I think about mine to the first time that we ever got behind the wheel of a car, right? These giant pieces of steel kill more people every year than a lot of other things do. And eventually we realized that if we want to function in society, we better learn how to drive a car. And most of us do. And then we get around and we end up using them every single day and then doing stupid stuff like eating and driving or texting and driving or whatever. And it just, my point in that is not that you should do that, but that you become more comfortable with it. You learn this skill and it's not as scary anymore.
Right, exactly. And you don't need to know how the engine works. You just need to know that, hey, when you press the gas pedal, this is what happens. When you turn the steering wheel, this is what happens. And those same concepts apply to a firearm. I don't need to know every single bolt and nut that's inside my firearm, but I know that it's only going to go off when I pull the trigger, and I have to be the one to do that. And I have to be responsible on how I do that and where I do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I had kind of brought this up earlier, but I'd love to dive into this a little deeper. The thought that people owning more guns may prompt some of our listeners to think that contributes to more violence, especially with what's going on in the media. Would you mind explaining how this isn't quite the case, that more guns on the streets don't necessarily mean more violence?
There's a couple of ways I'd probably respond to that. I think that if you look at the general population of gun owners, that overwhelmingly they are more law-abiding than your average citizen. There was a statistic somewhere, and I'm not going to get the number right, but basically, if you look at CCW holders specifically, they are more law-abiding than police officers. So like the number of infractions was less proportionally than police officers in general. The other thing is that when you're out in public, I think, people have a fear of loaded firearms being out in public. So when we're talking about CCW holders who are concealed carrying a loaded firearm when they're at the grocery store, at the movie theater, whatever it is. The thing about that is, I think you got to think about who the first person you're going to call if something happens, if something bad happens. There's a burglar, if there's an assault, if there's a mass shooter. I mean, that's the worst case scenario. But the first person you're going to call is somebody with a gun, a good guy with a gun. And if we can have more responsible, sane, trained, law-abiding citizens who are carrying firearms out in public, and we're not forcing people to carry guns. These are people who want to carry guns in public. That response time for a good guy with a gun is that much faster. There are examples out there all the time of crime that is being stopped by a good guy with a gun. And the media just doesn't cover it because it doesn't fit their narrative. So, if you look out there, those stories do exist. And I would encourage somebody to go Google, a CCW holder stopping crime or somebody pulling a firearm to stop a home intruder. Those stories are out there. Even the CDC says, it could be anywhere from, it was something, the range is super wide because not all of the incidents are reported, but, something from like 200,000 incidents a year to up to like 1 million every year. These are incidents where somebody had to use a gun to stop a crime.
Mm-hmm. And there are, like you mentioned, if you look online, there's some really cool YouTube videos that either were caught on a security camera or somebody happened to be filming at the time where, you know, a guy comes in and his intent is to rob a liquor store. His intent is to like rob this person at the gas station while they're pumping their gas. And they just messed with the wrong guy, right? And somebody ends up having a concealed carry permit and stops what's happening. And the guy usually they end up getting him on the ground and the cops come and the guy gets arrested. And no crime happened. And I think that was kind of the point I wanted to get to with this was that, like, when we're talking about having stricter laws, for example, on guns, the criminals don't care about the laws. The stricter laws are what is going to apply to the responsible gun owner that is there, the good guy with the gun, right?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. These laws, especially the ones that are being proposed right now, and even a lot of the laws that exist today, the only people they affect are the ones who want to be law abiding, who are going to follow those laws. And it just makes it so hard, so complicated. You know, there are scenarios where they're taking things that are normal, like owning standard capacity magazines. You know, this is commonplace across the country. And then they want to change the law and make people who are law-abiding citizens into criminals overnight just for owning something that they owned yesterday. Mm-hmm. That's just one example. You know, the other thing is all of these laws we can already see in states like California. So, for example, owning standard capacity magazines, having a waiting period after you purchase a firearm. These are things that are already in place in California. They're being proposed to become law nationwide. They don't stop crime. There's still crime happening every day in California. And there's unfortunately still shootings, and they all happen in gun-free zones.
Exactly.
So, you know, I mean, we can see there is statistical proof that these laws do nothing to deter crime. Whereas there are actual studies where having more CCW holders decreases the amount of crime in those areas, because now the criminals know that there's a higher chance that the person that they're trying to attack or rob or whatever it is, that they're going to be armed and they're going to be able to protect themselves, and there's not going to be as easy of a target as there used to be.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up the idea of gun-free zones. When we think about a lot of public buildings, schools, you know, a lot of areas are gun-free, right? And when we look at a lot of the stuff that gets, a lot of the mass shootings that happen, people are going to go for what their easiest target is. And if they know that somewhere is a gun-free zone, they're going to bet that there's not going to be anybody there to defend that property or defend those people. And so there's a higher chance that they're going to go there versus areas like if you had, you know, posters on the outside of your restaurant saying that every, you know, staff member was armed, they're probably not going to get robbed.
Exactly.
Now, I want to kind of dive into a little bit of a sensitive topic. And Desi and I talked about this a bit, where she shared some stats with me, which I was completely shocked. I had no idea, but I looked up online and it's something like 3 women per day in San Diego alone are victims of rape. 3. And that's reported, right? That's what we're aware of. That's insane.
That's way high. You know, I mean, before I started working specifically to help stop domestic violence and sexual assault, I didn't know that.
It's crazy. And you mentioned earlier that women are also statistically less likely to own firearms and obtain proper training with them. Do you feel that there's a correlation between these stats, or that those stats could improve if women were more likely to be armed?
I think the statistic would definitely improve if women were more likely to be armed, because you have to look at what a criminal would consider an easy target. You know, is it going to be me? I'm 5'4". I have a medium slender, you know, it used to be slender.
You're small.
Before COVID. But you know, I have a slender build. I'm not like super strong. is the criminal going to attack me, or is he going to attack my husband who's 6 feet and works out and looks like he can defend himself? Women are an easier target. Women are a more attractive target. They have things that criminals want. We carry our purses outside of our body, not just our bodies being, quote unquote, attractive for sexual assault, but the things that we have are also easier for them to take because we carry purses. We're always on our cell phones. We have these, big keychains with lots of fun, trinkets on them. We have expensive purses. These things all make us an easier and more attractive target, and we're less likely to be able to defend ourselves. So if more women are able to carry guns to protect themselves, then yeah, absolutely. I think that statistic would decline.
Yeah. And once again, like we were saying too, if, once people got the hint that more people could be carrying, they're not even going to mess with that. They're going to go for what's easy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm curious, especially being in San Diego, doesn't, other than the military, it doesn't tend to be a huge gun-friendly area overall. Have you received any blowback or negative attention?
We did a little bit at first, but in general, I think people realize that there's enough support that for the most part, they leave us be and let us do our thing. But it's funny that you say that San Diego is a fairly not gun-friendly area, because I think it actually is. And one of the things that I work really hard on to change with San Diego County gun owners, through San Diego County gun owners, is that gun owners are not alone. We're not the other guy. I think there's a lot of people out there who own guns who don't talk about guns because it's such a taboo subject, but there are a lot more gun owners than you think. And we're just so conditioned to whisper about it in the corner that we don't want to tell other people that we're gun owners. We're proud of it. It is not something to be afraid of. It is something that I am proud of. It shows that I passed the background check, that I'm not a criminal.
Yeah.
Like these are things that's more information than that I know about that gun owner than I do about the average person. And that to me actually makes that person better, because I know that at least they're not a criminal and they're responsible with their firearms.
Yeah, that's actually a really valid point, because for those listening that may not be aware, especially here in California, it's not easy to get a firearm. Like, it is a crazy background check. Like you said, there's a wait period, 10-day hold from the day that you make the payment to the day that you can pick it up. And anything can get in the way. Like, even something might be a false denied, on to pick up a firearm, which makes you take more time and you have to prove to them what's going on. And like for me, if I see someone that's a legal gun owner, I'm like, okay, your background is good, because that thing is hard to pass.
Exactly. I mean, and think about all the bureaucracy that exists. The DOJ is not the best of record keepers. There was actually an incident a few years ago, like maybe 4 years ago, where some reporter had submitted a FOIA information request, the Freedom of Information Act request for a list of instructors who are certified through the DOJ. So these are people who can issue a firearm safety certificate. So before you purchase a gun, you have to take this multiple choice test and get a card saying that you're authorized to purchase. So the people who issue that test have to be certified through the DOJ. So this reporter had submitted this request for this list, and the DOJ forgot to redact information. So there's this list out there with all of our names, addresses, physical descriptions, contact information. It was this huge leak, and it was this huge issue. And we all got letters saying oh, your information may have been accidentally given to, unauthorized parties or something like that. But this happens. This is the highest level of security that we should have. Our government should be protecting our information and not letting randos on the street know where I live. That's like a hit list of all the people who own guns, basically. And yet the federal government is trying to institute a nationwide registry of all gun owners where information about all of those gun owners is going to be publicly available. We have to provide information about all the firearms that we own. I can't trust them to keep that information. They can't even keep the DOJ instructor information safe. And you want this information publicly available. I feel like I'm getting off on this rant, this tangent.
No, it's okay.
So I apologize. These are just some of the ways that the government is trying to make it as hard as possible and unattractive as possible to be a gun owner and make it difficult, because it already is super difficult in California. We're suffering through it because Californians actually really love their guns, but it's just another example of what we don't want to see for the rest of the country.
What do you think the reason is that it's so difficult and there's so many loopholes for us to jump through?
Because the long game is to make it as difficult as possible, add as many little steps as possible. Politicians will say they don't want to take our guns away, but I think the long game is basically to take our guns away.
Yeah.
It may not be knocking door to door, but they're going to make it so difficult, so expensive, so, time consuming to become a gun owner that people are just not going to want to own guns anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So they're changing the culture of gun ownership, not just through laws and all these regulations, but through the media and saying that gun owners are irresponsible and dangerous and stuff like that. So it's definitely a long game. And they're coming at us from all sides.
Absolutely. I mean, I can even see this, like little things happening here and there. Like now we have the required background checks to purchase ammo. That's fairly new. And even when COVID happened, that obviously, like, it created a certain new market for people that weren't really interested in guns before came forward. But I also have noticed that a lot of people that purchased are trying to sell now as well. But because of this huge spike, there, a lot of the places were out of guns, and a lot of these parts come from Germany or other parts in the world, and there weren't any more guns for people to buy. I remember when COVID first happened, you walk into a gun store and the ammo and the guns are all off. There's like maybe one all available. Gone. Yeah. And we're not talking about $100. I mean, the average handgun's what, $500, $600, $700. And then if you want to get something fancy, you can be spending thousands. So it's not like people are spending $50 and walking out with a firearm.
I think what happened there is that when COVID first happened, everybody who was on the fence, who had thoughts about, oh, maybe eventually I'll get a gun, they realized I need to do it now.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody kind of did that at the same time. And so every gun got sold. There was just nothing in the shops. Even now, it's still kind of difficult. A year later, we're still kind of recovering from that. And then ammunition was just absolutely insane. It's still really hard to get ammo. If you find it, it's super expensive. It's really limited. Like some places you can only buy 1 or 2 boxes at a time.
Mm-hmm.
It's still really crazy. But I totally get it. I mean, when COVID first happened, we were shut down. It was this like minefield of just tinder waiting to spark. And I live on the San Diego La Mesa border. And so I'm actually fairly close to where the riots happened in La Mesa. I mean, it was like 2 miles down the road from me. That's uncomfortably close.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting them to come knock on my door, but I never would have thought that just down the street from me, that people would be looting entire shopping centers, burning down buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, throwing rocks at the police department. That stuff, that happens in movies. That doesn't happen in real life. And when that happened, I'm sitting there glued to the news and I can just feel that fear. And I can just only imagine what that fear felt like for somebody who didn't own guns and always kind of thought, oh, I'll get one someday. And they're like, I need to do it now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. That was one of the first, maybe the first time that I had a certain amount of fear of like, well, I don't, like you said, I don't know if they're going to come to my house, but these were big groups of people and I live near Poway. And so we had a little bit, it wasn't quite as bad as La Mesa was, but I remember watching that on the news and just being like, oh my God, like the cops can't even do anything because there were way too many people. And these were people that were burning down. Mm-hmm. Like I remember this guy that was being interviewed that was an immigrant to the United States and he had started his own business. I think it was a liquor store or a small shop, and they burnt down his whole place. And for some reason, I think he wasn't able to fulfill the liability insurance or something like that because he had just moved into a new building. I don't know. Something had happened. He didn't have insurance. And it was just like, I mean, his whole life. Yeah. It's crazy. And we totally got off topic here, but I thank you for explaining that. I can understand why people thought it was a good idea. And I guess just to like move that forward, that for those that are interested, hopefully we won't see something like this again, but we could. And that's not the only reason that somebody should be owning a firearm. Like you were saying, it's kind of that great equalizer for women or people that just want to be able to defend themselves when somebody does come for them. Now, for people that are listening, especially women, if they're interested in purchasing a firearm, but they have a lot of hesitation or they still have questions in their mind, what would be your initial advice?
I would find some way to kind of dip your toe in the water. So there's a couple of different resources available. You know, you did a whole episode about Not Me SD. That's a really great way to start. So if for your listeners, if they didn't get a chance to listen to that episode yet, you know, we have a mentorship program where we pair up women who are just starting their journey into firearms ownership. They're just starting to explore, just starting to research. We set them up with an experienced female gun owner so they can help them figure out not just the answers to their questions, but also what questions to ask. Because when I first became a gun owner, you know, I could sit at my computer and Google all day long, but I don't even know what to search for. Like, how do I explain what a roster is when I don't even know, you know, I didn't even know that thing existed. So the Not Me SD program is a really great way to start. We help women select and purchase a firearm, find the right training that's appropriate for them and what they're looking for. And if they're interested in getting a CCW, we help them do that as well. Then there's a lot of other little events that you can attend where you can try out firearms. For example, Women on Target is a really great program. It's very low cost, and you get to fire usually the programs down here in San Diego, they're a little bit different where, you know, in different areas of the country, even in areas of the state. But the two programs here in San Diego that run Women on Target, you get to try a pistol, a rifle, and a shotgun in one morning. It's like 3 or 4 hours, and you get to do a little bit of each of them. So it's a nice way to kind of try a bunch of different stuff. They use smaller calibers to make it a really friendly, less impactful, less recoil experience for the attendees. And then there's also a couple of women's groups around the county. They're super friendly. You know, they meet once a month or more to get some camaraderie with other women who are firearms owners or wanting to become firearms owners. And they have a lot of resources as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll list those in the description of the podcast as well. And I love that you're talking about women camaraderie. And I know that you focus so much on women's empowerment and holding others high. For me, sometimes I can get caught up in this like competitiveness of the world, you know, especially woman to woman. But why do you think it's so important for women to stick together and really hold each other high?
Not just women, I think, but I want to make sure that the whole gun owners community understands that we need to stick together. You know, more gun ownership is better for everybody, not just those who are in the circle. More friendly gun laws makes the entire place safer. It creates more customers for all of our gun shops. It creates more camaraderie between people. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, we're so conditioned to whisper in the corner about gun ownership, and it doesn't have to be like that. You know, we can be loud and proud about being gun owners, and women in particular, because we have the same fears and the same experiences. Maybe not everybody has suffered through sexual assault. It's a really high number though, by the way. 1 in 3 women have experienced sexual assault involving physical contact at some point in their lives. That's super high. And so even if you've never experienced it, I think every woman can relate to that. And for us all to be able to feel comfortable with being gun owners and being able to protect ourselves, not just with guns, but with pepper spray or hand to hand, some sort of martial arts, any of that. Those are all ways that we can all make each other safer.
Absolutely. And, thank you again for sharing the stats on women. What's crazy to me is through the start of this podcast, I've had so many different kind of women on here, different business owners, different leaders, all different walks of life. And I can tell you that almost every single one of you, including myself, has said something about sexual assault or violence that has happened in their past that prompted them to starting their own business or prompted them to get into something like what you and Desi are doing. And although there's a certain amount of comfortability for me on there that's like, oh, wow, like this, I can relate to this. It sucks. It's like, wait, you too? You went through this too? And a lot of these people, one woman I had a few episodes ago didn't even speak about it until she was in her 40s or 50s. And it happened when she was young. And it's like, oh my God, like this is something that happens way too often. One is too many, right? But these numbers are insane. And so I just want to tell you, thank you for kind of bringing this up. And, I hate that we have to, or that we feel the need to normalize this. It shouldn't be happening. But the fact that it is, and the fact that we can talk about it and see what's next, right? Like, what are we going to do next? I love that it can be comfortable in this space. So thank you.
Yeah. And the other thing is, there was that whole Me Too movement about how it was helping women feel comfortable in sharing their stories because they realized through the Me Too movement that they were not alone. And that's important. And I really appreciate what that opened up. But for me, it was more important to me to say, not me. Like, I don't want to be another Me Too. And I don't want to hear another story about this happening to other women. Like, I don't want to hear it happen again. So for me, we can be proactive about it. We can take our self-protection into our own hands and not have to fear becoming the next Me Too. Yeah. And so that's why we named the program Not Me.
I love it. Plus, it sounds really good. Not Me, SD.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll list those links along with San Diego County gun owners links in the description of this podcast, along with any way people can get a hold of you. I do want to kind of wrap this up with the last little topic. So, as a powerful woman, you're the new CEO of an organization. What sort of advice would you have for women who are listening that are interested in running or starting their own organization?
I think the most instrumental thing for me has been a really good support system. You can push your way through a lot. I think us as women, we're generally we have to overcome a lot in general, right? And we can expand that through the ways that we want to succeed in life, but find somebody or some people who will lift you up, because being able to fall back on somebody or have somebody there to help you and push you past your own comfort zone, that has been the biggest factor for me in feeling successful and being able to be successful, because I know that I have the support of my team behind me and they can tell me no, you totally deserve to be CEO. You totally have been doing this and that and helping with this program and running that program and founding Not Me SD. I tend to be fairly quiet. I don't like to overly promote myself, and I don't want to broadcast, my successes, but to have somebody behind you that says look at all these amazing things that you've done, you can totally do more and be more, that has been so important. And so I encourage everybody to find somebody and surround themselves with people who uplift you and push you to be more.
Yeah. And I love that you brought it up that it can be uncomfortable to promote yourself, because I can relate. I think a lot of women can relate to this. Even the ones that do promote themselves, it can be very uncomfortable. And that was kind of the reason for me starting this podcast, was like, where can I have a platform where I can lift other women up? Because I know that I like when other people do it for me, not so much when I have to do it myself. So kind of creating a space for all of us to kind of be together and get to know other people that have been on the podcast and all different kind of topics. So I love that you feel the same way. And I just wanted to ask you before we mention some of your links, was there anything else that you wanted to bring up today before we wrap it up?
I'm sure there was, and now I can't remember, but we covered so much really good stuff. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Cool. So as we mentioned, San Diego County gun owners, not me, San Diego, not me, SD. We're going to put those in the description of the podcast. But do you have any personal social media or website links that you would like to mention as well?
No, I think San Diego County gun owners, not me, SD. Those are my two babies. So I'll just let everybody check those out, and that's it.
Thank you so much for your time today, Wendy. And thank you for everything that you're doing for not just women, but men as well.
Thank you. You too.
And thank you everyone for listening, and we will catch you next time.